The auctioneer's voice was a gravelly rasp, a sound that scraped against the dry Dakota air like a shovel on hardpan earth. To Caleb, it was just another noise in a town full of them, a place he endured for salt, flour, and the bitter taste of other men's company. He stood by the livery, his gaze fixed on the horizon, on the vast, empty plains that mirrored the hollowed-out landscape of his own heart. He was there for a pair of draft horses, nothing more. But then the auctioneer's tone shifted, laced with a cruel amusement that snagged Caleb's attention. They were bringing out the last lot, a novelty from the railroad labor camps. A joke! He saw her then. A girl, barely a woman, standing on the crude wooden block. She was small, her dark hair a stark slash against the pale, dusty backdrop. Her hands were bound loosely in front of her, but it was her stillness that struck him. In a world of loud gestures and jeering laughter, she was an island of profound silence. The men around him made their crude bids, a nickel, a dime, a button from a coat. It was a game to them, a way to pass a blistering afternoon. They weren't bidding on a person, they were bidding on the right to humiliate. Caleb watched her face. It was a mask of placid resignation, yet her eyes, dark and deep, held a flicker of something ancient and unbreakable. He saw not a victim, but a survivor, a soul who had already weathered storms he could not imagine. He thought of his own home, a silent, cold place haunted by the ghost of a dead wife and filled with the suffocating dust of grief. He thought of his daughter, Lily, a small, quiet shadow who had not truly laughed in a year. The bidding stalled at $1. A final, insulting joke. Without thinking, without planning, Caleb raised a hand. His voice, unused to public proclamation, was a low rumble. $50. A hush fell over the crowd. The sum was absurd, an amount that could buy a good horse or a small herd of cattle. It was not a joke, it was a statement. The auctioneer, stunned, slammed his gavel. Sold. He walked forward, laid the silver coins on the table, and met her eyes for the first time. There was no gratitude, no fear, just a quiet, questioning appraisal. He untied the rope from her wrists with his calloused fingers. No words were exchanged. He had not bought a wife, or a servant, or a slave. He had bought a silence to match his own, and as he led her to his wagon, he wondered if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life, or if, for the first time in a long time, he had done something right. The journey back to the ranch was a long, wordless stretch of miles. The wagon wheels groaned a constant complaint against the baked earth, a lonely sound in the immense quiet of the prairie. Mai sat straight-backed on the bench, her small bundle of worldly possessions clutched in her lap. She did not look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the endless sea of grass, her expression unreadable. Caleb felt the weight of her presence beside him, a fragile yet solid thing. He was a man who lived by routine, by the predictable turning of the seasons and the simple, brutal logic of survival. This was an unknown quantity. An act of impulse he could not explain even to himself. He had seen the raw ugliness in those men's eyes and had acted against it. It was as simple and as complicated as that. When they finally crested the last rise, the homestead came into view. It was a stark silhouette against the bruised purple of the twilight sky, a simple timber house, a sturdy barn, and a lone cottonwood tree standing sentinel. To an outsider, it might have looked like a fortress of solitude. To Caleb, it was a tomb he had built with his own hands. The moment he opened the door, the coldness of the house rushed out to meet them. It was the chill of disuse, of a hearth long dead. Dust motes danced in the slivers of fading light, coating every surface in a fine grey shroud. A half-finished plate sat on the table, a testament to a meal eaten without appetite. The air was thick with memory and neglect. He gestured vaguely inside. "You can sleep there," he said, his voice a rough tool rusted from disuse. He pointed to a small cot in the corner, separated from the main room by a threadbare blanket hung over a rope. He expected tears, or fear, or perhaps a desperate plea. He received nothing but a quiet nod. She stepped inside, her movements economical and deliberate, and set her bundle down. She took in the room, the dusty floor, the unwashed dishes, the profound sense of abandonment, and her gaze lingered for a moment on a small, faded portrait on the mantel. A woman with a kind smile. Then, she turned back to him, her eyes clear and steady, and waited. The silence that fell between them was not empty, it was filled with everything they could not, or would not, say. He had brought her here, and now she was here. The transaction was complete. The consequences, however, had just begun. The first morning, Caleb awoke to an unfamiliar scent. It was not the stale smell of dust and sorrow, but the warm, earthy aroma of wood smoke and baking bread. He came out of his room to find Mai already moving through the main living space with a quiet, relentless purpose. The fire in the hearth was not just lit, it was a steady, contained heart of warmth, pushing back the persistent chill of the house. A pot of coffee was brewing, its fragrance a welcome stranger. She had already swept the floors, the rhythmic whisk of her broom a gentle percussion against the morning silence. She had found a tin of flour and, without instruction, was kneading a small loaf of dough on a scrubbed section of the tabletop. Her movements were fluid and efficient, a dance of competence. She did not look up as he entered, but he knew she was aware of him. He watched her for a long moment, this small woman who was methodically and single-handedly imposing order on his chaos. He had offered her a cot in a derelict house, and in return, she was offering him a home. He poured himself a mug of coffee. It was strong and hot, chasing away the lingering cold from his bones. He sat at the table and drank it, the silence between them thick but no longer hostile. Later that day, he saw her out by the small, neglected garden patch his late wife had tended. The earth was cracked and overrun with weeds. Mai was on her knees, patiently, painstakingly, pulling the invasive growth, her slender fingers working the soil. She was not trying to erase the past. It felt, to him, like she was trying to make space for a future. That evening, they ate at the table together for the first time. A simple stew, but it was hot and nourishing. As he ate, he noticed she had taken down the faded portrait from the mantel, gently wiped the glass clean of dust, and placed it back in its rightful spot. It was an act of profound respect, an acknowledgement of the ghost that lived with them. She was not trying to replace anyone. She was simply making the space they all inhabited more livable, more breathable. Her quiet transformation of his house was a mirror, reflecting back at him the state of his own neglected soul, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of shame, followed by something else entirely. A nascent curiosity. Lily had been watching the new woman from the shadows. A pale, silent child of 6, she had learned to move through the house like a whisper, her world having shrunk to the size of her father's grief. She observed Mai's every action with wide, solemn eyes. She watched her mend a tear in Caleb's shirt with neat, tiny stitches that were like bird tracks in snow. She watched her polish the clouded glass of the windows until the sunlight streamed in, sharp and clear. The new woman never tried to coax her out, never used the falsely sweet voice other adults did. She simply existed, a calm and steady presence in the tumultuous silence of their lives. The turning point came on a Tuesday. Mai was sitting on the porch steps, shelling peas into a large wooden bowl. She was humming a low, melodic sound that was not a song but a feeling, a thread of music woven from a land Lily would never know. The tune was melancholic yet peaceful, and it drew the little girl like a moth to a candle flame. Lily crept out of the house and sat on the step below her, her small hands clasped in her lap. Mai did not stop humming. She did not look at the child. She simply continued her work, her rhythm unbroken. After a long while, she held out a single, perfect pea pod. An offering. Lily hesitated, then took it. She fumbled with the pod, her small fingers clumsy, until Mai, with a subtle movement, showed her how to split it with her thumbnail. Lily popped the sweet green peas into her mouth one by one. They sat like that for nearly an hour, sharing the simple task, wrapped in a comfortable quiet that was a language all its own. Later that evening, as Caleb was tucking his daughter into bed, Lily spoke the first unsolicited word she had in months. "Papa," she whispered, her voice reedy. "The quiet lady. Does she have a name?" The question was a small, sharp stone dropped into the deep well of Caleb's detachment. He had fed her, sheltered her, but he had never once used her name. He had kept her at a distance, an object, a solution to a problem. Lily's innocent question forced him to see her as a person. "Yes," he said, his own voice sounding strange in the small, dark room. Her name is my. The syllables felt foreign on his tongue, yet saying them aloud felt like unlocking a door he hadn't known was closed. He had given her a name, and in doing so, he had begun to give her a place, not just in his house, but in his world. The bond between Mai and Lily grew in the soil of shared silence. It was a garden tended without words, flourishing through small, quiet gestures. Mai would find wildflowers on her morning walks and leave a small posy on Lily's pillow, purple prairie crocus and bright yellow buffalo beans. In return, Lily would leave a smooth, grey river stone by Mai's bowl at the dinner table. There was an unspoken understanding between the wounded child and the resilient woman. Mai never pushed, she simply created spaces for Lily to enter. She would sit and braid long blades of grass into intricate patterns, leaving them on the porch rail for Lily to find. Soon, Lily was sitting beside her, her small fingers mimicking Mai's, learning the silent language of the weaving. Caleb watched this slow, gentle thawing from a distance. He heard the ghost of a giggle from his daughter one afternoon as Mai showed her how to make a cat's cradle with a piece of twine. The sound was so unexpected it made his chest ache. It was a sound he thought had been buried with his wife. He began to see his home not as a place of endings, but as a place of quiet, tentative beginnings. The house was no longer just a shelter from the wind, it was warm, clean, and filled with the scent of baking and drying herbs. His daughter was no longer a shadow, she was a child again, her eyes slowly regaining their light. And Mai? Mai remained an enigma. She asked for nothing. She moved through his world with a grace and capability that humbled him. He saw the faint, silvery scars on her wrists when her sleeves rode up and the haunted look that sometimes crossed her face when she stared into the fire, and he knew her past was a country of sorrows he had no right to visit. Yet, her presence was a constant, steadying force. One evening, he came in from the barn, weary to the bone, and found his favorite tin mug, the one his wife had given him, sitting on the table. It had been dented and tarnished for years. Now, it was polished to a dull shine, the dent carefully hammered out. It was a small thing, a mundane object. But in that moment, it felt like a profound act of care. He picked up the mug, its familiar weight now somehow different, and looked over at Mai, who was quietly mending one of Lily's dresses by the firelight. For the first time, he felt a powerful, unnerving urge to speak, to thank her, to say something, anything. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he simply filled the mug with water and sat down, the silence between them now holding a new and fragile thing, the unspoken acknowledgement of a shared life. The sky had been a bruised, unsettling grey for days, the wind a low moan that promised violence. Then the blizzard came, not as a gentle blanketing of snow, but as a furious, white-toothed monster. It descended upon the prairie without warning, swallowing the world in a blinding vortex of ice and wind. The house, once a sanctuary, became a fragile ship in a roaring, frozen sea. For 2 days, they were prisoners of the storm, the windows rattling in their frames and the wind scraping at the walls like a desperate animal. On the 3rd night, Lily began to cough. By morning, a fever had taken hold, her small body burning with a dry, consuming heat. Caleb's blood ran cold. He knew this fever. It was the same one that had stolen his wife, a swift and merciless thief in the night. The doctor was a 2-day ride away in good weather. In this blizzard, he might as well have been on the moon. Panic, a feeling Caleb had long buried under layers of stoic resolve, began to claw its way up his throat. He was helpless, trapped by the storm and haunted by the ghost of his own failure. He paced the floor like a caged wolf while Lily's breathing grew shallow and ragged. It was Mai who moved into the void of his fear. Her face was calm, her movements precise. She took charge not with commands, but with competent, focused action. She bathed Lily's forehead with snow-chilled cloths. She brewed a pungent tea from a store of dried herbs she had gathered from the plains, yarrow and elderflower. She sat by the child's bedside, a constant, unwavering presence, murmuring soft, foreign words that were not prayers but something just as soothing. Caleb could do nothing but watch, his large, capable hands rendered useless. He brought her water, kept the fire roaring, and stood a silent, helpless vigil. The night stretched into an eternity, the only sounds the howling of the wind and Lily's labored breaths. In the darkest hour, as the fire cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, Mai looked up at him. Her eyes were dark with exhaustion, but they held no fear, only a fierce, unyielding resolve. In that moment, he saw the true depth of her strength. She was not just a survivor, she was a warrior. She was fighting for his daughter's life with a tenacity that shamed his own despair. He was witnessing a quiet, desperate battle, and he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that he could not bear to lose another soul in this house. The vigil stretched into a second day. The storm raged outside, and inside, the quiet battle for Lily's life continued. Caleb and Mai moved around each other in a silent, exhausted dance, united by their singular focus. The world had shrunk to the size of this small room, to the rise and fall of a child's chest. There was no past, no future, only the fragile, tenuous present. During a moment when Lily's fever seemed to break slightly and she fell into a restless sleep, Mai finally allowed herself to rest, slumping in a chair by the fire. Caleb brought her a mug of hot broth. She took it, her hands trembling slightly from fatigue. They sat in the dim light, the fire crackling between them, the storm a distant roar. It was the crushing weight of the silence, the shared fear, that finally broke him open. It was like this before, he said, his voice a harsh, broken thing. The words, once spoken, could not be stopped. They tumbled out of him, jagged and raw, fragments of a memory he had kept locked away. The fever. It took her so fast. One day she was hanging laundry, singing, the next, she was gone. The doctor couldn't get through. The snow was too deep, he wasn't looking at Mai, he was staring into the flames, seeing a past he could not escape. I promised I'd protect them. I built this house with my own hands to keep them safe. But I couldn't. The wilderness, it just takes what it wants. He fell silent, the confession leaving him hollowed out, exposed. He expected pity, or perhaps uncomfortable silence. Instead, he felt a gentle pressure on his forearm. He looked down and saw Mai's hand resting there. It was a small, simple touch, yet it anchored him, pulling him back from the precipice of his grief. Her eyes met his, and in their depths, he saw not pity, but a profound and sorrowful understanding. She did not need to speak of her own scars, of the losses she had endured. He could see it all there. In that shared moment of vulnerability, huddled against the storm, they were no longer a rancher and his purchased help. They were two survivors, two souls who understood the brutal arithmetic of loss, finding a sliver of solace in a simple, human touch. The storm had forced them together, and in their shared crucible, a new and fragile connection was being forged in the heart of the fire. When the world was reborn from its white tomb, the silence was absolute. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a landscape of impossible beauty and stark isolation. The snow was a deep, pristine blanket, sparkling under a pale winter sun. On the fourth morning, Lily's fever broke for good. She awoke, weak but lucid, and asked for a drink of water in a small, clear voice. The relief that washed over Caleb was so immense it almost brought him to his knees. He looked at Mai, who was sleeping upright in her chair, her face pale with exhaustion, and a feeling of profound, complicated gratitude swelled in his chest. A few days later, a rider appeared on the horizon, a dark speck moving slowly against the blinding white. It was Harmon, the belligerent man from town who had orchestrated the cruel auction, accompanied by two of his cronies. They rode up to the house, their laughter loud and jarring in the peaceful quiet. Harmon dismounted, his swagger undiminished. Well, well, he boomed, his eyes roaming over the tidy porch, the clear path shoveled to the barn. Looks like your little China doll is earning her keep, he winked at Caleb. Came to see if you're tired of your toy yet. I'll give you $10 for her. A tidy profit. Lily was watching from the window, her small face pressed against the cold glass. Caleb saw the flicker of fear in her eyes, and something inside him, something that had been frozen solid for years, finally shattered. He had always met the world's ugliness with silence, with retreat. But now, the world's ugliness was standing on his porch, trying to soil the fragile peace he had just discovered. He stepped out of the house and deliberately placed himself between Harmon and the door. He was not a large man, but in that moment, he seemed to possess the unmovable gravity of the earth itself. His voice, when it came, was not loud, but it cut through the cold air with the sharp edge of honed steel. "Her name is the words were a line drawn in the snow. She is not property. She is the heart of this house. You will not speak of her again. And you will get off my land." Now it was more than a defense, it was a declaration. A public claiming. He was no longer just her protector, he was her champion. Harmon, taken aback by the cold, dangerous fury in Caleb's eyes, stammered for a moment, then mounted his horse. They rode away, their jeers half-hearted and quickly swallowed by the vast, white silence. Caleb stood there until they were gone, his breath pluming in the frigid air, the master of his small, hard-won kingdom. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of their lives settled into a new, quiet harmony. The harshness of winter slowly gave way to the tentative promise of spring. The snow receded, revealing the sleeping earth beneath, and the first green shoots of prairie grass pushed their way toward the sun. The declaration on the porch had changed everything. It was a foundation upon which a new kind of structure was being built, beam by silent beam. Caleb began to change in small, almost imperceptible ways. He started talking to Lily not just in clipped responses, but in full sentences, telling her the names of the birds that returned to the Cartonwood tree. One afternoon, he came in from the fields and found Mai struggling to lift a heavy sack of flour. Without a word, he took it from her and hoisted it onto the shelf. As he turned, his hand brushed against hers. Neither of them pulled away. It was a fleeting, accidental touch, but it left a lingering warmth, a silent acknowledgement of the space that was shrinking between them. He started leaving things for her. A length of blue ribbon he'd bought in town, left on the kitchen table. A perfectly formed bird's nest he found in the barn, placed on the windowsill. These were his words, his poems, his confessions. He was speaking her language now, the language of quiet offerings. Mai, in turn, continued her gentle transformation of their world. She planted the garden with seeds she had carefully saved, her patient hands coaxing life from the stubborn soil. She filled the house not just with warmth, but with beauty, placing jars of wildflowers on the mantel and weaving fragrant sweetgrass into small, decorative braids that she hung by the door. Her presence was no longer just a fact of his life, it was its central, organizing principle. The house was no longer a tomb of memories but a vessel of quiet, growing life. He found himself watching her more and more, the way the light caught in her dark hair, the focused grace of her hands as she worked, the small, rare smile that touched her lips when Lily laughed. He was a man waking from a long, cold sleep, and the world was slowly, painstakingly, coming back into focus. And at the center of that world was her. The landscape bloomed. The endless prairie, once a reflection of his own desolation, was now a vibrant tapestry of color. The air was soft, filled with the scent of clover and damp earth. The peace they had earned was not a dramatic, triumphant thing, but a quiet, steady current that ran through their days. It was in the shared silence on the porch as they watched the sun set, a fiery spectacle that no longer felt like an ending, but a promise of another day. It was in the easy way Lily would now run between them, chattering about her day, taking both their hands, forming an unbreakable chain. Caleb's heart, which he had thought was a barren, frozen plot of land, had been patiently tilled and tended. Love had grown there, not a fiery, passionate blaze like his first love, but a deep-rooted, resilient plant that had weathered the harshest of storms. It was a love built on shared hardship, mutual respect, and the profound intimacy of unspoken understanding. One evening, he came to her as she stood by the window, looking out at the stars that were beginning to prick the darkening sky. He carried a small, crudely carved wooden box. He held it out to her. She opened it. Inside, nestled on a piece of soft velvet, was a simple silver ring. It was not ornate or expensive. It was plain, solid, and true, like the man who offered it. He did not ask a question. He did not need to. His lifetime of unspoken words was held in his gaze. He simply stood there, offering her the last piece of his walled-off heart. Mai looked from the ring to his face, and for the first time, she gave him a true, radiant smile. It was like the sun breaking through after a long winter. She took the ring and slid it onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused thumb stroking the cool metal. It was a pact. A promise. A beginning. They stood together, their hands clasped, two solitary figures who had found in each other a harbor from the storm. They had forged a family not from blood or law, but from the stronger bonds of kindness, courage, and a love that had learned to speak in the quietest of whispers. Outside, the great, wide prairie held them in its gentle embrace, a silent witness to their earned peace. In a world that tried to define them by their scars and their sorrows, Caleb and Mai discovered that a home is not a place you build with timber and nails, but a space you create in the shelter of another's heart. Their story reminds us that the deepest connections are often forged not in grand declarations, but in the quiet language of shared silence, simple acts of kindness, and the courage to stand for one another when the world is cruel. They teach us that even the most frozen of hearts can thaw under the patient warmth of compassion, and that family is not always the one we are born into, but the one we have the courage to choose. Their journey shows that true strength lies in resilience, and that love, in its purest form, is about seeing the person someone is, not the price they were forced to pay. If their story of quiet courage and unexpected love moved you, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Join our community for more stories that explore the depths of the human heart and celebrate the enduring power of hope. Thank you for watching.